So, guys, we are back from MKG. We had a wonderful workshop with Alix, and we developed a few texts with the people who are here. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Alix. You can read Alix's text, The Cheese Stories or Cheese of Truth, on our website. I will repeat it once more. It's sweatydwellings.hotglue.me. And now we will proceed with our embroidery corner practice. Muj is responsible for that. And I give the microphone to Muj and Filipa. So have a great talk.
Thank you for the great introduction, Luca. My name is Muj. I'm a graphic designer and collage maker. And in my practice, I love using design as a tool to create space for reflection and for discussion. And embroidery kind of served for me in a similar way, but I also have a bit of a complicated relationship with it, I would say. I used to do a lot of embroidery when I was a kid, but the school that I was going to, it was like the school system was super binary, so it was kind of expected that as a girl you would do sewing and embroidery, and then the boys would go to the wood workshop. And I was so pissed off about it, and I was usually like smuggling to the wood workshop because I wanted to work with the wood. But I also enjoyed embroidery, I would say. And then for so many years, also like, I don't know, like I always felt like embroidery is always undervalued as a very feminine practice. And it's also not considered art. And there's this also stupid binary division between arts and crafts. So it's more like crafts. And so like these were all the reasons that really shied me away from doing embroidery. But recently I was like, well, I want to go back to it, and because it's so relaxing. And I'm very happy that we're going to talk about it with Filipa, because I also think it's very anti-capitalist thing to do because it takes a lot of fucking time. And I hope I can swear. Yeah, like it kind of like forces you to slow down, which is also, I think, very beautiful because you can really get into the zone and be there and not think about your schedule and what you have to do and all the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both for the introductions. I'm also really excited to talk about this with you now. I think what I wanted to talk about first is how we started it. In the second workshop of our Sweaty Dwellings, we were in Berlin and we were figuring out what to do. And you brought the embroidery, and people just, I think Kenya started set with you first, and then I sat with you both, and it was so fluid the way you just, and then people started coming to us and just picking up a piece of embroidery of fabric to do embroidery on, and we would just automatically started talking about our childhoods and our mothers and grandmothers and all of that while we were doing this practice that forces you to slow down, and in a strange way it forces you to focus, but also not focus, because you can also do it very automatically and talk at the same time. And I think two really great things come from that, because what you start to embroider is like really from your intuition and your subconscious, because you cannot do two things at the same time while you are talking. And then also, I guess, relaxes you some kind of like defense mechanisms that you have. I wonder if this is what happens. So then you can really talk about very like strange, profound things from different parts of your heart and your mind with people that you are just meeting. So that was, I think that's why I think this tool is so powerful. Yes.
Yeah, you put it very beautifully. But like, it's interesting that you mentioned how it started, because now I also remember that actually when I was sitting with Kenya, and the first thing that we talked about was somehow grandmas, which is so ironic, but it was also very cute in a sense, like, yeah, like I kind of went back to my memories with my grandma. Like, she was a very crafty woman. She was like so good at like sewing clothes and all that. And she was also very proud of what she was doing. But like my mom, for example, like she would never do that, and she would say that, oh no, this is like a very grandma thing to do, like a very feminine, and etc. So it was kind of like a patriarchy, like playing into this like a whole mindset. And it's kind of like interesting also when you look at the history of embroidery, that it wasn't only thing that women were doing because there wasn't anything else to do and they were just bored. Sometimes they were also like trying to send some messages. Like there was like a feminist embroidery, like starting even from 19th century. And sometimes like even in this like archaeological research and stuff, men usually would find some pieces of embroidery, because they're also something that like you leave a trace of something somewhere and it stays, and it can stay for so many years. So it can also actually serve as a tool of resistance. Like it resists like against the time and yeah, and the society and everything. So it's also like interesting in a way that it's very subtle and gentle, but it can also be very powerful. And I also found it very interesting that at the time when we were doing embroidery, I mean, even like also before that, we talked about many things, but this also, it opened up some intimate conversations. Also today, like when we're talking about like how we navigate this world, sometimes like as non-male, and like what are the ways of protecting ourselves and everything. Sometimes these are not so easy conversations to open up, and I think embroidery is something that like really eases up, and yeah, you can like feel confident and you can feel like you are in the space where you can share.
Yeah, I think it gives you a really like good sense of community, especially because earlier today we were doing embroidery as a like ritual to start this publishing event, and we were all embroidering in the same piece of fabric, which also like just makes this connection even stronger, with like you're doing the same thing at the same time, but you're also building something together at the same time, which is, I guess this is a bit apart, but we also gave space for like just do whatever you want, and it doesn't have to connect, but it will connect eventually. So I think that was also really nice that you brought. But I think what you were just saying and connecting to our grandparents again, I think this is a very interesting time to be in, because I think our mothers have similar experiences, because my mother also really rejected her mother's ways as not feminist or like very old fashioned, and this like you lose a bit of the sense of the power in femininity and gentleness and in like all of this that is deemed inferior. And I had some stories from my, I'm not sure if I would share all, but some stories of my grandmothers in, I say mothers in plural because it's like people from the village. You have aunts, and it's a big, everyone is your grandmother in a way, in a sense. They're all cousins, all relate. Everyone's related, but they have they are from a time where women were extremely repressed in a dictatorship. Like they have had absolutely no rights of existing outside of being daughters or wives, but they actually held a lot of power, and a lot of it was in the domestic tasks that we now see as extremely like inferior, and obviously they were also seen like that. But I remember when I was growing up and having like one of my aunts/grandmothers telling me, like pulling me aside and saying, you know, when you get married, you cannot forget the power that a woman has because you control what your man eats, which is a bit creepy. It's extremely creepy. But it is a form. I think it's really interesting because we sometimes forget that these were like strong-headed women, and there are so many stories that they always did what they wanted, and they had the horrible part is that they had to fight so much to be able to speak and to be able to exist and take space, but they did it, and they were extremely had to be extremely aggressive in a way. And I think it's so unfair that we see them sometimes as this silent things. They were oppressed, but they were not silenced. They tried to silence them. And yes, and I think in embroidery and like everything that they made was a way to also speak and create and made their own identities in a way.
Yeah, and maybe something like a fun anecdote kind of thing related to it. I found this very old magazine from a secondhand bookshop when I was visiting in Istanbul, and this magazine was kind of like, it was giving instructions to women, like how to do embroidery and like how you can do like different patchworks and etc. And the language was like super interesting. I think I also talked about it like biznike a bit. Like the language was very twisted. Like some parts of it was kind of suggesting that, oh, like you need to do embroidery because like it's kind of like a sign of being a good housewife. But then the some parts were like, oh, like, but you should also enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a little like defiance.
Yeah. Like it's just like for your own creativity, just so you know. So I found it like super interesting because like when you think about it, also back then, women were not, at least like in some countries, they were not allowed to practice arts or like go into like arts or architecture or into this kind of fields. So for them, house also played like a place, like a playground where they could practice art or like being creative and kind of being out of this like housework zone. So I think it also played an important role for the women in the domestic space. Because, yeah, it can be very creative and it shouldn't be actually considered less than an art.
Yeah, and even like we were talking about Bauhaus before, and this was something that, I mean, women were not allowed to do architecture because Walter Gropius believed that we were not able to see tri-dimensional. So I think this is also a funny story. And all of the courses of embroidery, tapestry, were not really seen as highly as architecture or arts or fine arts, even though the women were doing it were artists and were innovating and were a part of the Bauhaus movement. And yeah, I think it's also interesting to take that space back for us.
Yeah, kind of like to redefine and reclaim what it means to do embroidery or weaving or something else. Yeah, like interestingly enough, like in Bauhaus, women were pushed usually to disciplines like weaving and illustrations, which is also interesting. But like especially like doing illustrations for children books. Because of course, like they were expected to have this like a love for children and all this bullshit feelings. Apparently, men didn't have. Yeah, so it's it's interesting in that sense. Like I don't really know how women actually reclaim their space in Bauhaus. I think it's just at some point like they had to. Probably after many complaints, they just had to change their policies. But I believe like at the time they also did a lot of pieces probably with embroidery and weaving to protest.
Yes, I think there were a lot. Actually, I don't want to speak about something I don't know yet, but I was reading into that, like the protests in Bauhaus that women were able to, I mean, but they were already being able to study. So I think this was like step by step, but they were protesting this. And, oh, I just lost my train of thought. But I wanted to say something and I forgot. It's okay. It was about women not being taken seriously, taking the space in our embroidery.
And grandmas, maybe.
I got it because we have some illustrator friends there, and the women being pushed to illustration, and we talk about this also a lot, like it's a fine line between illustration and art a lot of times, and the amount of women who are illustrators and the amount of men that, like, I think feel more comfortable. I wonder why this is, but feel more comfortable asserting themselves as artists. Because when you say you're an artist, it's I think sometimes you have to justify yourself much more than an illustrator. And I also wonder, like, how today we still do the same things, like we still. And I see some artists talking about, for example, being a multidisciplinary artist. And it's just about freeing yourself from all of the boxes, because sometimes we just, without really thinking about it, we put ourselves in a box where there's so many possibilities that we don't see anymore, because we are in the box because capitalism needs you to be in the box, because you need to serve a certain purpose and provide a certain service. And that's why I think embroidery, to bring it back to embroidery, because it is this, I've been to art exhibitions where there is embroidery exhibited as a piece of art. And I think that's so interesting, because it's all about context in the end, and how the art world is a market. Not to bring it all to capitalism. But it is like, what is the difference between the embroidery we are doing now, right? Like, it's all about context. You can put it in the high value. What is the value, and why is that high value? Like, who decides that? And I think we are now in an exciting time that we can decide that for ourselves. And we can decide that our embroidery is just a piece of cloth that is for family purposes, entertainment purposes, or it's a fine art piece and it should be exhibited, and we can take it upon ourselves and do that. And that's, I guess I'm kind of finishing on a positive, optimistic note. That even though there's a lot of things that are not going well in the world that we still need to change, there we have a lot of space to build. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very great message, I think, you left. And also in this world that requires you work so much and have burnouts, etc., I think embroidery can be a very healing practice, just to get out of this thinking and free yourself.
Yes.
And also, like, we wanted to play some parts of the embroidery session that we had in the morning, and I hope you'll enjoy.
Thank you.
Yes, I think half an hour would be enough.
Yeah, if anyone feels like sharing something about the conversations, beautiful conversations we had, just for this time, like about an hour, feel free.
Arina, what's happening?
I think for me, this conversation we had about friends, it was very emotional. Cause I don't know, like every time when I go into this topic, it's kind of an area that makes me very moved. Because friends are very important, of course, and also, I don't know, sometimes I feel like we live in a society where it's kind of expected that you prefer your relationship over friendships, but I find that bullshit. I think friendships are very important, and they can be even more important than relationships.
I mean,
It's also relationship, yeah. So
That's also just a misconception.
yeah.
As soon as I'm romantic, all friendships, or like my friendship, is not as work, and that's sad.
Yeah, I mean they are relationship. I second that. That's why it's also hard to let go when the friendship is not working anymore. So.
Yeah, but then again, like also just treating your friendships as relationships, it's also, it kind of makes it an important point to also kind of like break up with your friends. If it's like to treat it also similarly, to maybe find closure or something if something goes wrong, or like do you want to ghost your friends, or like, you know, like also in the sense of like how do you end things if it's not good anymore.
I also have a feeling that, like in my surrounding, friendships are built up really easily, and they evolve and stuff. And then also like to break them up is really easy. But I think like to take also things from the romantic part into a relationship, that you also have to work on the relationship, and it will like maybe change meanwhile you're growing up or something, so that you're also doing the work of maintaining it and taking care of it.
Yeah, I think it made me like all of the things we talked about like really make me think about love and how we exist in the world as just loving and caring beings for each other, with like understanding and respect, and how that can be so powerful in affecting change and bringing like a more, I don't know, inclusive society. Because I feel like it's, I don't know, I feel like friends as relationships, as we were talking about, and like this need to mourn your friends, and it can be really lonely, because if people are, I also think that if people are detached like this, if people are detached from themselves, they don't have the capacity also to understand that you are mourning a friend, or like the way you are connected to people. If they are not even able to connect like that with themselves, how could they have that?
Also, this opens up the world to a more queer perspective in general on relationships, because when you're having relationships with all the people you are involved with, if they are romantic or not, or just in a platonic way. Yeah. Can you give me my phone?